Boy, I hope you're not driving while you're watching this.
Well, unfortunately, I am. I pulled over though. I'm
Okay.
My job entitles me to travel, so the bus routing is very important to me right now.
All right.
So
Well, I'm Jim Vizinity here. Nice to meet you. Be
nice
safe.
to meet you. Thank you.
John, you are unmuted.
Okay, is everybody with us?
Yes.
Just checking on a little echo here. Are we okay, John?
We're fixed. I believe so.
Okay, we'll open the meeting and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silence. I ask everyone to keep in their thoughts during that moment of silence. Two of our retired employees who were recovering from a serious automobile accident with serious injuries, but they are recovering. They're both elderly. Thomas Carr was the electricity teacher at Tech Memorial and a longtime wrestling coach, and his wife June was the longtime president of the Erie Educational Secretaries Association. Let's include them in our thoughts after the moment of silence. And now I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. This is a non-voting work session of the board. We call it our committee of the whole. I say that for the benefit of those who aren't familiar with our practices here. So especially maybe to the speakers tonight, but for the sake of the citizens who requested time to speak, we allow 3 minutes to each of you. And when there are multiple people like there is tonight, we more strictly watch the 3-minute time limit. So I ask you to consider your remarks before you begin and try to do your best to condense them into something very close to 3 minutes. We try to be reasonable, but with the number of speakers we have and with the work session that we have to complete, we have to pay attention to the time limit. So I ask everyone to be concise and to their point. First citizen requesting that we had on the list is Brianna Alanis. Brianna?
Yes. Hi, how are you?
Good.
My name is Brianna Alanis, and I am a mom of two, what used to be Erie School District children. I have since put my children in LMA, Luther Memorial Academy, due to the fact that we didn't know what was going on with the Erie School District. Both my husband and I are full-time frontline workers. We have worked all through COVID, and we have not gotten a lot of explanations on where our children were going in regards to their education. Further then, when we had discussed with family, we decided to put them in private school with the understanding that the Erie School District was to bus our children, which for us, we're frontline workers. We still work full time, 40 to 50 hours a week. And now the busing is being taken away. So I have a 6th grader and a 1st grader. To get them all the way across town, to get them to school and back from school on time. They were walking to and from school because we live 3 blocks away from our Erie School District school. There was people around that could take care of them, when I couldn't because I am a full-time worker. Our neighbor has been gracious enough to do that for us. And, they meet her, or she meets them at the bus stop and walks them home. We feel kind of failed because we chose to take our kids out of public school because we weren't sure how to continue working full time and making sure that our kids were still taught properly. We feel very failed, and this just kind of takes it further, that now you're telling us that we can't bus our kids to the private school so that they can still get the education that they need. With that, I am done.
Brianna, I apologize for mispronouncing your name. If it helps you feel a little better, we're not taking any action on that tonight, but we hear you, and we're going to hear from some other people who quite possibly are going to tell us something similar. So we are here to listen, and we'll try to be as understanding as we can as we get to the point where we make that decision. So thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Giovanna Jordan. Giovanna? Are you there, Giovanna? Next is Teresa Wyman. Teresa? Teresa Wyman? Next is Heather Bartlett. Heather Bartlett.
Hello?
Heather, go ahead.
Hi.
Could you give your address too, Heather? I should have asked Brianna.
Sure. My address is 1136 East 29th Street.
Thank you.
Like I said, my name's Heather Bartlett. My son Joshua Bartlett. I guess technically we're still Erie Public School District students. But I, like Brianna, have taken my son out of the Erie Public School because of the fact of going remote until at least potentially November, because he is still a elementary qualified student. My son has ADHD and anxiety disorder, so being remote was not an option. So private school was the way to go for us with having those issues and needing to be full-time taught. Our issue is my husband and I are both essential workers. I am a nurse at the hospital, and it's very convenient for us for busing because the bus does come right down our street every day to the corner. So he has easy access on and off the bus. And when we signed up for private school, we were told ahead of time that the school district is busing our children, which that was what made us kind of go in that direction. And then to have that potentially taken away from our kids after the school year has already started and we've made arrangements, kind of not fair to the kids. When I know that other kids in the district technically are not going to be bused because they won't be in school, but I know kids with special needs and other things will still be bused through the district. And to already try to pull the plug on this after the school year's already started for our kids because they've started August 24th, kind of puts things up in the air for parents who, my child's a 5th grader, he's 10 years old, he gets on the bus before his dad goes to work and he gets off the bus before we get home from work, but we're comfortable with him being dropped off at our house with only 30 minutes until I'm home. And because of the COVID regulations this year, after school programs are not taking as many students, and those spots have already been filled through LMA. So we can't just change our recommendations now for after school care and such now that, you know, the school year has started, and to try to take the busing away when that was already promised to us, when we pay taxpayer dollars into the school district, and also you get federal funding from the state for our children, we should still be allowed to have that option for our kids to get it on and off the bus every day. And that's just pretty much all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
Jennifer Lopez. Jennifer Lopez. Christopher Page.
Yes.
Go ahead, Christopher. Could you please give us your address and then go ahead?
Yes, my address is 2720 Holland Street in the Academy neighborhood in Erie, Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
I would just like to say that, first of all, thank you to our frontline workers that are in attendance in this meeting. And thank you to everybody that showed up, and thank you to the Erie School Board for hearing what we have to say. I'm a tool maker, and as such, I work odd hours. Usually I'm up at 4 o'clock in the morning and at work long before my kids are even awake. I've paid taxes in the city of Erie for 10 years on this residence, and of course, as well, taxes to the school district. And though I have never utilized the Erie Public Schools for my own students, I went to Erie Public Schools myself. I graduated from East High, and I don't think it's quite fair that you're going to start in the beginning of the year with busing and then take that away from everybody, as was said before. It's just kind of disheartening. We pay our tax dollars too, and I think that our kids should be treated fairly and equally as such. That's pretty much all I have to say. But I hope that you'll reconsider and continue on with busing all of these children to school because especially now in the middle of a pandemic with all the uncertainty, they don't need another uncertainty to add into the mix. So thank you very much.
Okay, Christopher, as I said, the decision isn't made yet. We're approaching it, but perhaps at the end of these remarks, we have a few more speakers to hear from. I'll ask the superintendent to spell out what our dilemma is, what our options are, what our choices.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Christopher, thank you. Tahira Clark. She's here. Tahira.
Yes, hold on. Thank you. Sorry, I was muted. My name is Tahira Clark, and I'm also here with Anna Williams, another mother from LMA.
Tahira.
My address is 1864 Buffalo Road.
Okay.
Apartment E2.
That's all right. Go ahead.
And my concern is just as the other parents. My son, or our sons, have just recently started riding the bus as of last year. We do take into consideration and we do make preparations to call and such and let them know that the boys won't be riding the bus or for whatever, so that they can do schedule changes. I work for Delta. I work here in Erie, but because we're suspended right now, I'm on reserve. So that means that I have to go to Buffalo, Cleveland, or Pittsburgh in order to work. I rely on the bus system in order to get my child to and from school. I just got off the highway right now, and I'm just now making it to a practice for my child. He has no idea, so he's going to be excited that I'm here. So my frustration and everything else is that my child is not giving the advantages that he would be giving if public schools have went to school. We abide by the rules and we do everything of well that is need be. So if busing doesn't continue, then I'll have to change my career. Like I'll literally have to go into something else. Planes don't come in or land unless I'm on the ground. So my job is very important, but I'm willing to sacrifice that so that my child can have an education. And I think that it's not fair that we have to give up these advantages or rights that are supposedly guaranteed to our children. The other mother here also is on the same page or wavelength as I, because she would take over control of my child if I had to do something else, which means it's putting a frustration or a strain on someone else. I don't want that burden on someone else for my child. So if you guys can work something out to where there are buses that can maybe just do us or what have you, I'm willing to do whatever it is that needs to be done so that my child can continue to be bused for school at this point here. Because we won't change schools, but we feel as though we should be able to have the same advantages that if our child was going to an Erie public school.
Thank you, Tahira. Chandrika Crockett. Chandrika Crockett. Bonnie Daly. Bonnie. Amy Miller. Amy. Angela Polinsky. Angela Polinsky. Okay, that's all the speakers we have listed. In a moment, I'll ask the superintendent if he wants to concisely just make a comment on where we are with this and what our situation is. And I would ask now that all of those citizens who joined us for the public comment section of the meeting, please join us on the YouTube channel. A link to the district's YouTube channel is on our website. Because we need to continue with our meeting and communicate between ourselves, that way we ask that you now exit the Zoom and join us on the YouTube channel, which is available on the district's website. Mr. Polito, do you have any remarks or comments to make about what we heard from those concerned citizens?
Yes, Mr. President. As I informed the board last week, we were actually notified by the School Boards Association that as a result of our school district going remote, that we no longer were required under the school code to provide transportation to non-public students. Again, with the budget concerns and constraints that we have this year, we wanted to make sure that you as a school board were aware of this. This is certainly a policy decision. We do have this on the agenda a little later on tonight, and Mr. Brockman and Attorney Wachter are prepared to explain that policy and what your options are so that you can discuss it and make a decision.
Okay, I did say to those people that we weren't going to make a voting decision tonight, but if you're asking at that point of the meeting, if we'll take a head count, I'll have an idea. Will that make it so, or will we vote next week?
We will vote next week. Mr. President.
Mr. Walker?
Mr. President, we can have that discussion during the actual meeting. Mr. Polito, if the consensus is to continue with the busing, I don't know if we would anticipate having to do a vote. Mr. Polito's giving me appropriate head nods here. So if the consensus is that we would not, that we would continue the busing, there'd be no need for a vote and the status quo would continue. If we were going to stop the busing, then we would need a vote.
Okay, but we can have that discussion later this evening.
That is item
7
on the agenda this evening.
All right, so we'll have that discussion at that time.
And lastly, those members of the public, now would be the time to exit the meeting and join us on the YouTube channel. Thank you very much.
Okay. First item up for us to discuss and consider and learn about is building ventilation. Mr. Bob Engelbaum, HHSDR Architects, and Mr. Jim Vizzini from CJL Engineering. I want to introduce them, or do you want to turn it to them?
And turn it over to them. As we've been discussing, we've had some pretty significant concerns with our ventilation, and the board has had a lot of questions about what we're going to do to remedy it. We felt it was important to bring the experts here tonight to really review what our issues are and our plan of attack, and also be here to answer any questions you may have about our ventilation issue. So with that, I'll turn it over to either Bob or Jim.
This is Bob Engelbaum, and I'm also here with John Finn in our Sharon office, and then Jim Vizzini and his team are at CJL Engineering. In a minute, I'll let Jim kind of walk you through the report. We did a complete report, and then also we've put a summary of that together, which I think you should have in front of you. The plan here, from a timeline standpoint, is to finish up and go to a quote method to get quotes from contractors to make these repairs. We did work with Mr. Brockman on sending information in the Department of Education. They approved the quote process, which they refer to as emergency projects, and that's section 751 of the school code. So we have the Department of Education's approval to proceed with this quote method. And we'll be doing that with the hopes of then getting the quotes in towards the end of September and getting underway with the repairs. So with that said, from a timeline standpoint, I was going to let Jim Vizzini from CJL Engineering walk you through the matrix of work that shows the 9 elementaries, 2 middle school, 2 high school, and then also a summary of what that work would be. So I guess if there are any other questions on that, I was going to ask Jim to go ahead and proceed with that.
Thanks, Bob. And thanks, folks. As some of you know, or some of you don't, working with Bob, John, Neil, and Brian, CJL conducted a very thorough investigation of all the district facilities in an effort to determine how many existing pieces of mechanical equipment that provide ventilation to certain classrooms and other areas of the building were either functional or non-functional? And if not functional, what level of work would be required to get them back online? And the main goal to that was to be able to meet the state's baseline requirement for safe reopening of schools, ventilation being a key component to that for some obvious reasons. As most of you know, you have some aging facilities, and we came up with a scope of work that respects both the district's money and thought process as it comes to long-term renovations or proposed upgrades to various buildings. And in that is what is in that first line matrix of estimated short-term repair cost. That is basically putting our hands on all the classroom ventilating equipment. Okay, thanks, John. So on about 2/3 of the way over to the right, well, obviously you see all the names of the schools, whether the ventilation systems work, some general notes. There's a much longer full report that goes into this in much more detail. But this executive summary spreadsheet is a quick snapshot of what exists in all these buildings. And then through that, we came up with a short-term repair in order to make sure that all classrooms could technically, without any question, quantitatively meet the requirements of the State Department of Education, that the ventilation system was functional, not just with windows and natural ventilation, but throughout the winter when it's too cold outside to keep the windows open. That's that first line of costs. The elementary schools total $346,000, the middle's $103,000, and the high school's $194,000. Then what we've continued to add to that since this report was completed a few weeks ago were other enhancements that make mechanical systems an active part of basically air sterilization, both ultraviolet lights and air handling units in what's called short term is ionization. It's actually needlepoint bipolar ionization, generating ions, which are just positive and negatively charged oxygen particles that are quantitatively proven to kill viruses and bacteria by disturbing their internal cellular structure. And then as soon as they combine, those things die, the ions become no charge, and they help filter out particulates in the air better. These technologies are being used fairly widely now with some fairly high-end folks, like hospitals, large banks. We actually have these in our office in Johnstown. We're doing them in our office in Pittsburgh. They are items that we are highly recommending to make your mechanical systems a way of making your inside environmental conditions much closer to outside than they ever were in the past. So with that, we added 3 more line items. The first one is unit ventilator, the needlepoint ionization. Because for the most part, we're working in all these unit ventilators anyway to get the ventilation systems working. We will have contractors mobilized and those units opened up, torn apart. In some instances, getting motors and fans replaced, redoing the controls on them. In our world, it would only make sense to do these enhancements to those units while you have them opened up, because that's the time when it's going to cost the least amount of money as opposed to coming back and doing it later. The next column over are the classroom air handlers. These are some of the buildings that have central air systems, like an East Middle School, where your mechanical system is consolidated to some head-end equipment. It's not done at each individual classroom. Therefore, it's less expensive and less intrusive to go upgrade those air handlers with ultraviolet lights and ionization, because you're not dealing with 100 unit ventilators. You're dealing with 3 or 4 or 5 central station air handling units. And then the far right column was that if we're in these schools, there's a lot of other large group areas like auditoriums, gyms, cafeterias, where there could be large gatherings of people, and not sure how you would use them in the coming months. But if we were able to basically sterilize that air, then the concept of having to social distance to keep everybody real far apart, which may or may not be good. But the fact is, we're actively killing pathogens in the air. That's another significant enhancement for all your mechanical systems in the district. And the short version is the base estimated short-term project total was $643,000 as a cost estimate. You know, these aren't bid yet. But then if you sum totaled all of them, in which case, for the most part, all these schools will now have completely enhanced air delivery systems throughout. That totals $1.5 million. With that, if you have any questions, I'm sure you do, feel free to ask, or we can certainly have more of this dialogue as we go and continue to work with the school district.
Mr. President, I have some questions.
Okay, gentlemen, can we question you now?
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Sumner.
Sure. And Jim, I have in front of me that chart, and I'm trying to make sense of it as well. And the first question I have is what do the asterisks mean in that first column? There's an asterisk on several of them, but it doesn't reference anything. You know, for example, Deal has a yes, and then an asterisk in that first column.
Let me pull my full report out here. Excuse me, Sumner, because in the full report, I believe that's explained and expanded upon. But then we were updating this sheet just for cost, and it might not be relevant for this piece. But bear with me; it's a long report.
Well,
so I have it.
We can disregard that for the moment, or?
Well, I'll explain it because it might make some more sense to you.
Okay.
So in the full report, which was dated August 7th, this was after our survey of all the buildings and walking through all this equipment. There was a single asterisk number, and that the comment was the HVAC systems still need repairs and updates to become fully functional. So that column originally in that spreadsheet was dealing with, can an HVAC system provide sufficient outdoor airflow? And in some instances, the yes, but it came with a caveat, it still needed to have work done on it. So then that work being done on it are some of the things you're looking at on the far right.
Okay, well, that's helpful. I'm not quite sure what a unit ventilator is. I thought the buildings with steam heat, that's all they had, but they apparently are unit ventilators for each individual classroom. I'm not sure what that is.
Yeah, what we would call a classroom unit ventilator is, if you're familiar with walking into a room, there's usually a box sitting under the window with a grill that's 30 inches above the floor.
I walked into those rooms in 1960, but yes.
And in some instances, like the old Central Tech, the high school, those date from 1957. Those are still the same unit ventilators from when they went in 63 years ago. So that is a classroom unit ventilator, and that is where the ventilation is done on a room by room basis by those unit ventilators.
And in this proposal, you know, I understand what you're talking about, that some that have central ventilation, like Harding and East, it's easier to do because it's a central system. But on these other schools that have those unit ventilators in each classroom, can you add this UVC equipment to them as well? Is that what that final column is for? Or?
It is if we have air handlers that exist already. So in some of that final column, in some of those buildings that only have unit ventilators for the classrooms, those that far right column is for air handling units, say like for gymnasiums, auditoriums, or cafeterias. They are not converting all the unit ventilator classrooms into central aired systems.
Okay, so where we've got a relatively easy fix on the few schools that have central ventilation, we aren't able to do anything with many of the old systems.
Correct. Like if you took Collegiate Academy, for example, Sumner, there are actually, I think, 39 classrooms in that building that have no mechanical ventilation system whatsoever. No unit ventilators, no air handlers. They have steam cast iron radiators that do no ventilation. They just heat the walls up. So we have no monies assigned for that, because in the long range plan, we're proposing to put central air handlers in and converting those classrooms so they would be similar to what's at East. But for right now, there is no answer to those rooms because there is no system in place right now. So there's nothing to enhance short of putting a whole complete renovation package in construction. And the other thing to keep in mind, this whole report and then this spreadsheet was done with the thought of what can we reasonably get done in a time frame that would support an early November reopening of these schools, which, and then our directive from Brian and the administration was the elementaries are the first priority in all of that. So everything we're showing here, it's not major construction. The long lead time items we have are the ultraviolet lights. They're down to about 8 weeks now, which is better than the 12 it was a few weeks ago. But this is this is a scope of work that can also match a timeline to get the elementaries done for sure first by, I think, that November 3rd date, and the other ones would follow close behind. But an area like Collegiate, let's just stay at Collegiate, to go redo those 39 rooms, that's a design process that would take probably until at least November, and then the construction would be another 8, 10, 12 months or something like that.
But here we have 9 elementary schools, and 2, apparently Harding and Pfeiffer Burley, have central ventilation. So it's a relatively easy fix, although I bet everybody in the country is trying to order this equipment. So we may not be able to get it for a year or something like that. But
No, we've confirmed with the suppliers on both the ultraviolet lighting. The time frame on that as of this week is an 8-week ship time once the order was made. And then the needlepoint ionization modules are shorter than that. They're 4 to 6 weeks.
So we actually can have a kind of a full cure at Harding and Pfeiffer Burley, but that leaves us with 7 schools where if we're going to convert them at some time, I understand we wouldn't want to do something interim. But I know, for example, in my own bedroom, I have an air filter that has a UVC light in it that I bought for probably $250 at Lowe's a few years ago. Should we be getting portable units into these, particularly the special needs classrooms, which we're opening quite soon? Because I'm quite concerned about the exposure that the instructors are going to have, because they're going to be in there all day with the children, and that's quite an exposure. Would portable units help out?
There are portable, like you said, ultraviolet light filtration systems. The ones you got versus ones that are like institutionally or commercially available are definitely a different level of quality, but the technology and the science behind them is very similar in that if you move air in front of a high level of the UVC, it's the C wavelength of light. It's like the purple light you'd have in a tanning bed. It's not like the sun, but the C wavelength is still that strong. It will kill those viruses. And when you rotate it through those units on a continuous basis, it might not kill everything the first time, but you keep doing it over and over and over again, it will eventually do that. And that's what we're proposing in these air handling units. Now, it's certainly anything that's done that would enhance the air quality in our mind is a good thing to do. The ionization part we like, for one, it's real low energy use. And 2, when those ions are in the air, they have a lifespan of like 60 seconds to 2 minutes before they'll attach to something, and then they become uncharged. But that's when they're eradicating the pathogens. And you fill the room up with those, they basically are attacking the viruses throughout the entire volume of the room, as opposed to a small little recirculating device that's only taking care of the air that's going through it. So there's a lot of discussion on how much or how little you can do. Certainly those fan filter units that have the UVs in them are good, and they could be another enhancement. The things we're doing are basically putting something that would be permanently operating for the district that use very little power. Those UV lights don't take much power, and the ionization takes minimal amps anytime we're using these. So in our company position as we're dealing with other folks, if you had to pick one thing to do, if you couldn't do 2 or 3, like better filtration, UV lights, or ionization, the ionization is a very simple way and a very effective way of killing pathogens in the air. And it's technically why the outside air is always cleaner than the inside air, because ions get generated naturally. You know, near flowing water, waterfalls, lightning strikes, any number of naturally occurring phenomena generate ions, and that's what makes outside air like a natural disinfectant. It's when it gets stuck inside and gets stagnant and recirculated is when you have the problems. So you're concerned for teachers. If they're in a room, one, they're not going to be in the room with 30 people anymore. Those days are long gone. You haven't had that for a while. And then for these special needs, special education, it's going to be a handful of people in a room that has a unit ventilator that was actually sized to bring the ventilation air in for 30 people. So if now you have, say, 10 people in the room, you'll have 3 times the amount of fresh air being brought in continually once we walk away from this work.
Well, my concern, and I'm sure it's going to be the concern of everybody, is that actually I think we have 10 grade schools. I don't see Edison on the list, but
no, Edison's not on the list because there's nothing we can do with Edison short of gutting the whole system. And that, and again, when we were doing that original report, Sumner, the logic and trying to put things together and have all the dominoes lined up is why would you spend that much money on Edison if we don't even know what its long-range plan is going to be?
Okay, but then following along with that, East does have central ventilation, so that's one that has a relatively easy fix as well. And
correct.
Potentially grade school classes could be held in there. But here's the concern I have, and everybody else will have the same concern. We have 10 schools, and we only have 2 that can be converted relatively quickly to quite a safe system, which is something that's going to be quite a benefit to the community going forward, because this works with a flu or whatever that else comes along. It's going to help the public health in the community to have this. But my concern is if we're opening on November 4th and we've got 7 schools that we can't really bring up to the level of the other ones, I think we need to be putting in a stopgap. You know, if these units are $250, $300 each, they're not big enough to do a classroom, but maybe 2 or 3 of them are big enough. It seems to me, to be fair to all the parents, that we need to be doing something at the other schools, the 7 or 8 schools that don't have central ventilation, so they'll be on a par, because most of the schools can't really be brought up in the time available. And I have no further questions, but thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
Jim, I just want to confirm, though, that the plan for the other elementary schools is to bring the ventilation up to where it needs to be so that the unit ventilators are working, correct?
That is absolutely correct.
And to your previous point, we're going to have a much smaller amount of students in each of those classrooms, and the ventilation will still be scaled for 30 plus, correct?
That's correct. Any one of those unit ventilators was at one point in time sized to handle a certain amount of fixed minimum outside air. And per code, that was done to meet a certain count of people in the room. And usually the default number was a 30 count. And then, as you know, that number, they don't pound 30 kids in a room anymore regardless. And the way you'd be looking at these is going to be some partial occupancy anyway. So it's all moving in the right direction.
Do any other board members have questions for Jim or Bob?
Mr. President?
Is that Darlene?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So Jim, do you have any concerns about any of our classrooms right now not being safe for our teachers being in there instructing? That the air quality, that there's not enough flow, or will these enhancements that we are adding to this plan take care of that?
Well, if you're asking me if anyone is never going to get sick again, I can't answer that.
No, I'm not asking. I'm not.
However, yes. However, the reason for this original survey was to find out in the operational occupied mode if unit ventilators or air handling units were opening the outside air dampers, and when they were running, were they bringing in enough fresh air to meet those original codes. And from that study, we found out that most of the units did, but only under a local control. If they were tied to the original building automatic system, they weren't getting the proper pressurized air signals. so they did not function. So if you walked into a room now, there is every chance that while the fan might be spinning, it's not bringing in any fresh air. It's just recirculating the air. So the first piece of this project that we're currently designing is to make sure that with small individual room controls, when that room goes to occupied mode, when someone's going in to teach and they hit a switch, that ventilation system is then perpetually active and you are bringing in fresh air. And then we wanted to add the needlepoint ionization into those unit ventilators because now while they're moving air, they're also generating ions in the space. So now you're getting not just ventilation, but ionization to effectively eradicate the pathogens. So as far as a safe standpoint, those rooms would be, when we're done, significantly safer than they ever were before, even when they were functioning, because they had no ionic capabilities back then. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And at Piper Burley, that was the one school that I looked at when I looked at your report, where that was the only school that had no, under the HVAC system, provides sufficient outdoor airflow, and no under sufficient outdoor airflow because the windows don't open. So are these enhancements what is going to help keep that air healthy for our students and teachers? Or is there another way that you're bringing that airflow in?
The reason it was flagged as no was because the original air handlers that were in there were not functioning properly and were not bringing in any fresh air.
Okay.
They listed they have the capability to do that, but they weren't working. And a lot of it was because they had frozen some coils in the past and just shut off the outside air. So if you'd see the general note in there, we're going to rebuild those units and put new heating coils in them and then get the controls functional. As soon as we do that, we now have a fully functional ventilation system to meet the requirements of the state, which are good requirements. And then while we're there, we're proposing okay, it's a central air system. We can easily get the UV lights and the ionization modules in those select air handling units and not have to go into room by room by room. We take care of it at the central air handling unit location. But that was the original reason for the no. That system just didn't function to be able to ventilate at all.
Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
And Mr. Brockman, if you could weigh in on this, I think in the interim here, we, in addition to making sure windows are open and giving specific instructions that were developed by Mr. Vinzini to the engineers and principals, we also manually overrode those unit ventilators to bring in outside air. Is that correct?
Yeah, any of the places that we can get our hands on the actual UVs in the rooms, we made those adjustments and we have them opened up as much as they can.
Thank you.
Any other questions from board members on this?
I do, Mr. President.
Who's that?
Rose.
It's Rose.
Go ahead, Rose.
That's okay. I don't see Wilson on this list. So is Wilson then, I'm presuming, in the same position as Edison? Anybody want to answer that? We have people in Wilson, teachers teaching.
Rose, this is Jim Vinzini again. So in the
Okay.
original report, Wilson Middle was reviewed. It was tabulated. It needs major renovations. We don't think there's anything we can do with that existing system to make it reasonably functional. Mm-hmm. And so that's why it was pulled out of this first scope of work.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. President?
There you go.
Yes, so Brian, is there any state money for this type of project?
Unfortunately, there's not. If we were working on a bigger project and there was PlanCon dollars available, we might have been able to utilize those. However, we did in our original facilities plan have 15 million of the $80 million set aside for ventilation repairs and upgrades. So certainly this this work was going to be done over time already. So we can utilize those dollars and still be able to complete what we initially planned in that facilities plan. We're just accelerating the HVAC work.
Anyone else on ventilation? I heard a voice. Well, if not, thank you, Mr. Engelbaum, Mr. Mazzini, and I'm sure we'll be hearing from you again and working with you. in the days
Well,
ahead.
you're very welcome. If folks have more questions, just let us know. We'll get back to you.
We'll do that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Mr. President, before we move on,
Go ahead, Brian.
two items we'd like to bring up. The plan right now is to have this work bid out and ready for, or at least receive quotes and bring it to you on September 28th. So we have two questions for you on that. Are you okay with us scheduling a special meeting to approve that so that we can keep this moving? And the other issue, and we've done this in the past on emergency repairs, would you be okay with us or waiving the responsible contractor in this case? Again, it adds another layer of lag time and wait on this. And because this is an emergency, we'd like to keep it moving.
Okay, we'll get you an answer, Brian, but the solicitor has to be heard for something. Mr. Walker?
I'm looking quickly here on board docs. Maybe Neil, if you could help me with my recollection. I believe that the school board already adopted a resolution covering every time that the school district was going to utilize the emergency contracting provision where the responsible contractor was waived. Is that correct? I'm looking for it now, but I believe you are correct, solicitor.
I thought so too.
So give me a minute. If you'd like, Mr. President, to speak to the special meeting, I will have that hopefully taken care of, answered by the time we finish with that.
Okay, well, the superintendent's requesting of us that we keep this in motion and making progress by having a meeting on the 28th. Does anybody have a problem with that?
I'm fine.
No,
Okay,
fine.
Tom, Rose, me, I'm fine.
I'm fine.
I'm
with it.
fine. That's Lori.
Sumner, Lori, that's 5 of us.
I'll be there.
Okay,
I will
Tyler.
too.
Mr.
Darlene?
President, can I just ask a question to Brian?
Sure.
Okay, so are you proposing we do all the work, the 1.5 million,
But
or the quick fixes?
we're going to put it into alternate bids. So we'll bring you all those options so that you can select what you'd like to move ahead on. If, some of those bigger fixes
Okay.
are too expensive at that time, then we can just decide to go with the basics to get things up and running.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. President, I have a question of Neil.
Go ahead, Tom.
Since we know the equipment that we need, can we purchase it now or at least put in a request so we're not behind in the lead time to get this? Because if we have to bid it out, that'll take additional amount of time. Additionally, if we pay for it, would it be a less price or lower price than if a contractor were to mark up the same unit that we know we're going to buy some ionization unit?
So that would be something that I would have to work with both CJL and the architects with, just to make sure that I know exactly what is spelled out. So right now, what's happening is CJL and HHSDR are creating the spec books and the blueprint design for each of the buildings down to a room by room basis. So it's not like it might not necessarily be the same exact actuator switch or same fix for every single building, let alone every single room. So that is something that we can work with them on to try to get the ball rolling, to get things moving in that direction. But we are not right at the point right now where we can go out and get quotes for the actual individual items that we would need for the fixes. And John and Bob, you guys can jump in if I misspoke on that one.
No, we think you're correct on that, Neil, too. This is such a custom approach to all of the equipment across the district, that being such a large scale, that, you know, it wouldn't really lend itself right now to going out and getting the equipment ahead of time. Also, on top of that, leaving it all within a contractor's responsibility is much cleaner for the district. There's less headaches. There's less things that may come about, hypothetical situations of who broke what, and things like that if there is some errors in the shipping. So yeah, it may be just better just to leave it in the hands of the contractor moving forward.
Attorney Walker, are you ready?
On July 11 of 2017, the school board adopted a resolution authorizing the waiver of responsible contracting when the school district is utilizing emergency contracting procedures.
So that'll remain in effect unless we undid it, so we don't have to wrestle with that one tonight. But the question of whether we're willing and available to meet on the 28th to keep this moving, we have just about everybody saying okay. Okay, Brian?
Thank you.
Okay, next up is KOZ extension. We have Mr. Chris Groner, the Director of Community and Economic Development for the City of Erie with us. If he's there now, Chris, Mr. Groner, KOZ extension.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Council, for inviting me tonight to talk to you about what we put on your agenda. And that is for the renewal of two of the Keystone Opportunity Zones that are in the city. This is a program that dates back to the late 90s when we had initially 14 or 15 of these KOZs throughout the city. And over the years, they've been renewed and then developed over time. And as they become developed, they roll off of that system. We have two that are remaining. One is we're working with the ownership at McGinnis Rolled Rings. It's the 24 acres that's adjacent to their facility. And then the other one is with the minority Minority Community Investment Coalition, who now owns Sabacchio Business Park. So we're working with Gary Horton, Chantel Hilliard, and James Sherrod on marketing the 7 remaining parcels in the Sabacchio Business Park. The KOZ program primarily is it's a state program that established a tax-free zone to try to incentivize the development of these sites. And what you would be looking at approving would be an extension of those zones for 10 more years. They are zones that exempt businesses from state business and corporate tax, state sales tax, and mercantile license taxes and things like that at the state level. Where it affects us locally is there would continue to be an abatement on those remaining sites on the property tax side. And these are properties that have been KOZs for quite some time. So we have not been, they're not part of our budgets now. So that's what we have before you, is extending this. And hopefully this will be the last time, because all of the other sites have been developed over time. If you recall, there was a parcel over on 16th in Pittsburgh years ago that saw some development. Places like Hero BX, the Calypso development. There were some parcels along 14th and Parade. Over the years, those have been developed and now have been returned to the tax rolls. So we're down to 2 sites that remain, and we're hoping to be able to attract some investment soon to those sites.
Mr. Groner, where is the first site? You mentioned McGinnis. Where's that at?
That is on East 12th Street. There is 24 acres that is adjacent to the facility. McGinnis itself at one time was a KOZ. All of that property has been developed over time. And so the remaining parcel, we're hopeful that that will be developed by McGinnis. We believe.
Thanks. When do the current, when do these expire, these agreements that we had in place?
These expire the end of December 31st, but the state deadline to renew the zones is in October 31st. So these have to be submitted and processed before that. And so materially speaking, the way it affects our budget with our LERTA here, those sites, if and when they are developed, we already have a local abatement in place. So this really is more of a state tax issue and an abatement until they're developed.
So my last question, this goes beyond LERTA, or it's pretty much equal to it?
It's pretty much an overlap. In terms of how it affects the local budgets, it's more of an overlap. The other taxes that are exempted are all state related, corporate tax, sales tax, things like that. So it's an overlap to our LERTA.
Thanks. I just tried to anticipate some questions, but now I'll call upon the board members if any of them have any questions for you. Anyone?
Mr. President, if I may, if the board has no questions.
Mr. Walker?
I do want to point out to the board that we've received 2 letters of support from the mayor's office asking the board to act affirmatively upon this. We have those on file. Additionally, if the board gives us the consensus that they would like to move forward with the resolution to extend the KOZs per the request of the city and the city's Department of Community and Economic Development, we would need to add that item to supplemental agenda.
Okay, you're talking about putting on for the next meeting, or next September meeting?
Yes, sir. Some of the other governing bodies are waiting to see if the school district would move first, as we're one of the larger taxing pieces. And that's at least my understanding.
Tim, we did put it on city council's agenda this morning, and they did pass it. So we went ahead and moved it onto their agenda this morning. So.
Okay, so city council has moved it. County council would typically wait until both the city and the school district move on such items. So yes, we would. It is the recommendation, if you're going to move forward, that it be done next week's meeting.
Well, I would suggest you go ahead and prepare a resolution to extend it, and then the board can have the time between now and next Wednesday to mull it over, consider, ask questions, and decide next week.
We'll have it on supplemental.
Everyone okay with that?
I am, and I'm in favor of it.
Okay. Well, we'll have a week to think about it. Next up is Title IX. Attorney Gornall, Attorney Jennifer Gornall.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
I can.
Excellent. Okay, I participated in the last meeting that we had, explaining to the board why we were recommending that you pass an interim or a stopgap resolution in which the board said, yes, the administration is directed to and the district is going to comply with all of the new provisions of the recently updated Title IX regulations. And I promised you that I would get to you in very short order the actual policies that do implement in finer detail all of the regulatory content in that new regulation that was passed at the end of May. I didn't feel comfortable pushing them through earlier because of the pending litigation, but federal court did finally come down and denied the request for extension or postponement of the effective date of those regulations. So they did go into effect August 14th. And that is why I quickly then spent a lot of time reviewing and making recommendations to and revising the packet of PSBA policies, the main ones about this issue. And that's what you have before you this evening. I know that there's a policy committee, and typically any policy revisions go through that committee. But since the effective date of this new law was August 14th, I would recommend that the board fast track this, maybe hopefully approve them at next week's meeting, if at all possible. And then certainly, if you want to, you can always study the policies as passed in more detail at the committee level, and we can always make revisions to them moving forward. But I did make some substantial revisions that I really felt were necessary to the PSBA policies, and that's what you have uploaded in board docs for you. Additionally, we couldn't update the student handbook provisions relative to Title IX until we had final policy language that we were ready to bring to the board on Title IX. So since those documents are in final form, at least from a legal perspective, I drafted an addendum or a summary of the 50 to 60 pages of policy provisions that are before you for approval, and created a much shorter summary of those policies and attachments to those policies for inclusion in the student handbook. So that also is before you for approval this week. And if you approve it, we will be able to embed that updated language into the student handbook for the start of the school year. And thankfully, we are able to do that at the last minute because the students are signing off on the student handbook this year virtually instead of through printed copy. So we don't have to print 10,000 copies of it. We can just upload it into what the students will be accessing. So with that said, are there any substantive questions about the information that I provided with regard to Title IX?
Anyone?
Mr. President?
Tyler?
I have two questions. One being, I did note that discrimination, we've included gender identity. Are we going to, or could we include, I guess it would be a request to please include gender expression as well. I think it's important to note that it matters that a student can identify, but it also matters that they can then express themselves in alignment with that gender.
I think interestingly, the PSBA policy doesn't have listed as a carve-out class gender identity. I included that in your specific policy, number one, because of the Erie County Human Relations Act that does protect gender identity, as a protected class. And secondly, the Erie School District has protected, I think we've used the words gender identity for years in your existing policies. So I did carve that out. I think that's where the law is going in light of the Supreme Court case that came out earlier this summer, which determined that gender identity is under the umbrella within the meaning of sex under Title VII. Historically, Title IX has been interpreted consistent with Title VII. So as long as your board, as long as the rest of the board, I don't personally have a problem. I think gender expression arguably falls under the same umbrella that, if we're going to say gender identity, gender expression isn't really, it might be different, but it's the same. It falls under the same reasoning that it would also be protected, I would say, under current law. So I think that's a pretty easy change to make, and that's something that we've been pretty protective of in this school district for years.
I agree, and I think that Erie has also set precedent for many other districts to follow suit in, and I would love for us to continue in that manner. My second one would be, my question was around the definition of reasonable combination for disadvantaged students. When we say disadvantaged students, could you let me know what that word means? I guess I don't fully understand what they're referencing there. So when it pulls it says disadvantaged students.
No, I believe you. And if it says disadvantaged, I'm going to look at that again, because I think what they meant was disabled. And I'm wondering if that's even a typo, because there are many times throughout these policies and attachments where that language is used, and it was used for, reasonable accommodations typically is used in the context of students with disabilities. So I will check that out, because I don't know what exactly disadvantaged student means. That's not a term of art in my world.
So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll check that. Thank you.
Mr. Wachter?
Tyler, which section, because we do have 50 pages of documents, which section were you looking at where it made that reference? Do you know off the top of your head?
I had it written into my Word docs, of course.
That's fine. We can find it. I just didn't know if you had it on the top.
Follow up with an email on with both of you, but I believe it's under the complaint procedures when it was going through and defining. I'll find it, and so that way I'm not just guessing. I'll find it and I'll send it.
Okay, thank you.
So Jennifer, you're telling us that you're bringing us a resolution to act on next Wednesday that includes your updated work and adjustments to the Title IX policy? I don't see it here, so it'll be supplemental.
Mr. President, I believe it is under 6.17.
Oh, I see it.
Yeah, we put a placeholder on it
All right, I
before
see
the
it.
agenda went out.
We do need to upload the attachments. We do need to upload the policy documents themselves. We wanted to have that conversation with the board first. It appears that unless there's any disagreement, we will include the gender expression. We will check the disadvantaged versus disabled controversy, and then upload those documents as recommended by Attorney Gorham.
Okay, with those adjustments is everyone okay if we proceed as they described that we would? That is voting next week to approve the changes. And we'll have them in advance of the meeting.
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Yes.
Any other questions for Attorney Gornall tonight? If you think of any between now and Wednesday, they can be relayed to her through email. Thank you, Jennifer.
You're welcome. Have a good night, everybody.
You too.
Okay, next thing we have is the 2020-21 reopening with Assistant Superintendent Teresa Zumagawa. Teresa?
Thank you, Mr. President. So just reporting to the board that things are continuing to move for opening next week. We've been working closely with the EEA and building principals. There are still some bugs that we have to work out. For example, some technology concerns, some equipment needs, logins, which would come under technology concerns. Brian, Neal, and I have been in the buildings for about the last week and a half to talk to some of our teachers. We have received some feedback, and there are a few tweaks that we do need to make. We are prepared to do that so we can support them moving forward. This process will continue throughout, probably at least the first quarter. There are definitely different levels of comfort right now. And what we're working on are some things that we can get out to the entire teaching staff. So the levels of comfort could be addressed, and we can continue to support those who need our support. We have started the materials distribution, which is going very well. I don't have numbers to report, but as we were visiting schools, the buildings were busy, so that is good news. And once we finish this week, we'll be working on some plans to reach out to those who have not picked up their materials. Mr. Pleo, do you have anything to add?
Just that it was good to get out into the buildings and see staff there working hard on getting their virtual classroom set up and connecting with students and families as they came to pick up their devices. And I'd echo Ms. Zumagawa's comments that things as far as the device distribution goes are running very smoothly, and we're very pleased with the amount of families that have been turning up in this first few days.
Any questions or comments from the board?
Mr. President?
Rose?
I have a couple that I want to address. I know you're aware that the teachers are extremely frustrated with either the lack of professional development in Schoology, and they're very frustrated, very worried, and it's kind of permeating from building to building.
So we've been out again, and Ms. Sheridan, we've discussed this morning, and certainly you've pointed out some different areas that we do have some concerns. So we've reached out and are providing additional supports to those buildings. We've been getting around and talking to all the principals, trying to get into classrooms and talk to individual teachers to find out what additional supports they need to be prepared for next week. I think in particular, we have 2 buildings right now that have more concerns than the other, and we're going to be spending a lot of time there tomorrow, making sure that those teachers are ready to go the upcoming week. But it is really a mixed bag. There's a lot of teachers that are off and running, and ready to go, and some are having some concerns, and we want to make sure that we know who those individuals are so that we can support them and make sure they're successful next week.
Mr. President.
Spiegel.
Darlene agrees.
Go ahead, Tom, and then Darlene.
Tom is muted.
Tom, you're muted.
I'm sorry. What is the first day of school the teachers will report?
They reported this past Tuesday or last Tuesday.
So are they doing a dry run with the technology with Schoology?
Yes, they received some more formal training last week, and then this week we had some additional professional development scheduled for them. We eliminated most of that to give them more time to work with their peers and work in their classroom to get things up and running.
Will there be a test? So this way we know that they're competent with that technology?
I don't think we have a formal test set up for that, but again, I know the principals have been meeting with individuals to make sure they're comfortable with it. We've been reaching out, again, getting into the buildings to make sure that we're reaching out to those teachers.
And there are also teacher teams so there are teachers who are making other teachers' students in their classrooms and testing it that way as well.
All right. Thank you.
Darlene?
Thank you, John. 2 thoughts. One, are we doing any training of substitutes that may potentially have to go in and use Schoology? Should some of these teachers the anxiety gets to be too much and they decide to maybe take a leave or something?
Yes, that's tomorrow morning at 8:30.
Okay, great. And then the second one, I had some people reach out to me about the consumables. There's some rationale out there that they feel, or the teachers feel, that might be a waste of resources for us this year, passing out all the consumables with the technology. So I just wondered what the rationale, Teresa, was for the consumables, so I can take that back.
So one,
like the math consumables.
Pardon me, Dar?
Like the math consumables for one, the books that will be sent home.
So some of the things that we're working out with the technology with the vendors is editable PDFs and what works and what doesn't work. There are some tasks in our consumables that, especially in our primary grades, that we actually need students to have paper and pencil. So we may be looking at the possibility as far as submission for the little ones as to potentially taking pictures of their work and submitting. That's one of the concerns that came up today when we were talking with some of the teacher groups. So we're looking at potential solutions, but we want to gather their feedback so we understand what the needs are in the classrooms, so we can make sure that what we provide them is going to set them and our students up for success as far as work going back and forth.
Great. And then how about the consumables on the middle school level, the rationale there? Is it the same?
It pretty much, yes. Once we start to figure some of these things out, we had all of that, I believe, ordered before we were even in this situation. So to get the kids used to what the new curriculum is going to be in the middle school, that's probably part of the rationale in distributing it.
So there really isn't any cost savings then for us by sending those consumables home because they already were ordered, and so we might as well utilize them.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else on the reopening?
And Mr. President, I understand that if teachers are going to board members, I would encourage them to send them our way to address these concerns. We're trying to create multiple avenues for teachers to reach out if they have concerns. They can always reach out to their building principals. They can reach out to their education association. We have the reopening portal for the staff members that has the FAQ on it and the email that they can send an email out if they have questions or concerns. And of course, they can always call me, Teresa, or Neil, Karen, or Nora if they have any particular questions. So again, we're trying to create multiple avenues for our teachers to reach out if they're having questions or concerns. We're here to help. We're going to support our teachers and make sure they're successful next week.
Anything else on the reopening tonight?
Thank you, Brian, for that comment.
Next up is the health and safety plan. Neil?
Thank you, Mr. President. So earlier this afternoon, I sent everyone on the board the changes that are being proposed to the health and safety plans, both the regular one and the athletic one. I figured a document like that was a little bit easier to kind of look through versus trying to fish through the entire document that you guys would be approving. So I'll start with just the regular one, and I'll share my screen so that everybody can see it. So with our general ed, our educational health and safety plan, there are just two changes that we are making for next week's meeting. The first one is we're updating the universal face covering language. So the original one that was board approved, at the time, we were working off the governor's guidance that was released on sometime in July. Well, since the approval of the health and safety plan by the board, the universal face covering guidance actually changed. And so we wanted to make sure that our health and safety plan was up to date with the guidance that was given by the governor's office. So that's the first change. It basically meant, in a nutshell, prior, students were able to take their face masks off as long as they were seated 6 feet from each other, even though they were sitting at their own desk. Well, when the governor made the announcement on the 17th of August that was no longer the case, and that essentially a student had to wear their face mask all day with some exceptions, medical issues, a mental health issue that is a documented doctor's note, as well as eating and drinking 6 feet apart, or you're allowed to have a face covering, a mask break, which can last no more than 10 minutes, as long as you're 6 feet apart from somebody else. So those are the only exceptions. So we wanted to make sure that our health and safety plan was in line with what the governor's orders were saying. The other section that was added, which we put it on to the back of the health and safety plan, has to deal with the student parenting program. So we got notification from the individuals from the state level that they required us to have a plan for that program. And so in working with the program manager for that, it was developed their health and safety plan, which kind of deals more specifically with the parenting staff. And so we attached that to the end of the document as Appendix B.
Any questions or comments from the board? By this,
Mr. President?
Go ahead, Darlene.
So Neil, when I had my conversation with Attorney Gornall about special ed and asking for doctor's excuses, I believe, and I don't have my notes in front of me, that she said she didn't know whether we would be doing that as a district or whether she would recommend that because it would trigger something called Childline. I might not be right on that, but.
Go ahead, I'm sorry, Dar.
So you're saying that now the governor's come out and that's their guidance, so we do have to request those doctor's excuses?
Yeah, so that's what the governor's guidance states, is that anybody who has some kind of a medical diagnosis that could be written into a 504 plan or it's written into their IEP, those would be things that we could consider allowing a student to show up that is not wearing an appropriate face covering. I mean, I guess that's the other thing, right? So I think when everybody thinks of face coverings, we all think of the typical masks that we have that go behind the ears or tie behind the head. However, there are alternatives to that. There are face shields and we can utilize those for some of those individuals as well.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else on health and safety tonight?
Well, Mr. President, I just wanted to at least bring up the other one, which is the athletic one, because there are some changes to that. So the first one was a simple one. It's something that I should have caught the first time through, so I apologize. But the transportation number in that still stated 48 students, and we wanted to make sure that it was adjusted to the 24 student capacity as our regular health and safety plan does. The other thing was that our current health and safety plan for the athletics didn't necessarily speak to anything that was specific to a sport. And the PIAA had released some considerations and recommendations for each individual sport. And to make sure that we are keeping all of our student athletes safe, we felt that it was important to embed this into our health and safety plan. And so that was placed at the end of the original one as Appendix A. And it gets very specific to what we should be seeing with each individual sport that will be played this fall.
And Neil, that question that was uncertain late last week about band and cheerleaders attending games, I think there was a belief that the state was going to allow it, and as long as it kept us under the 250 person maximum attendance. Is there anything new on that or a change?
So there was the change to that, and then there was a change actually today from the governor's office. So cheerleaders and band are allowed to attend a sporting event. But as you said, Mr. President, they count towards the 25 for indoor activities and 250 for outdoor activities. And then late today at about, 4:30, the governor announced that spectators are also permitted. And I'm going to, sorry, I went too far. So the spectators are actually also permitted to attend sporting events. Now that contradicts what the governor released in July 15th, which is actually currently listed in the health and safety plan. So this is what we have currently. And it basically says the same thing, that no fans or spectators are allowed to attend our sports, because at the time, again, prior to 4:30 today, that was the ruling from the governor's office. But today he said that fans would be allowed to attend. However, it still would fall into those 25 for indoor and 250 for outdoor events.
I was unaware of that, Neil. I have faith in you, but I anticipate we'll have problems when the 26th person wants to come in, or the 251st, and how we'll make that call. And I assume too that perhaps you have it in this draft of the updated policies that the cheerleading coaches and the band directors will have it stressed to them that they have a big responsibility to enforce guidelines that we expect of them. I know you and Brian told me last week at our pre-meeting that you were going to make it an important point that coaches understood they had some bigger responsibilities to be very attentive to. I just assume that transfers also to cheerleading and band and now spectators.
It does. So embedded in the document that I have on my screen, and then also that I sent you earlier at the last page of the document speaks of the recommendations for both cheerleading and band. So they were not included in the original PIAA recommendations. So that came from the National Cheerleading Association and their recommendations, as well as several different marching band associations based on their recommendations. So that's where we pulled that information from.
Well, as I said, I have faith in you in this ever-changing climate, but I trust you'll stay on it and keep us apprised, and any adjustments we have to make, we'll make. Everyone's aware of everyone's safety concerns that have been expressed in the last 2 months of our meetings. Thank you, Neil. Anything else?
Well, Mr. President.
Tom?
So I'm just asking, I just want to be clear, say for a basketball game, you're only allowed 25 people in a basketball court.
Correct.
So coaches, the players, the refs, you're not going to have enough people to play you.
So you're right, Mr. Spagel.
Am I wrong?
No. So some of the things that we've had to talk with the coaches about is having, if you've got a 15-person basketball team, that you can't bring all 15 to the game, whether it's home or away, that you're basically going to have your squad that plays that night, and you're going to have to limit the number of coaches that go there. I mean, at least for a varsity basketball game, there's 3 officials. So that means that the other 2 teams are basically, their hands are tied to 11 individuals, including the coaches and the players and the athletic training staff.
And they don't consider the size of the stadium, the arena, we realize this is silly, right? I mean, just it's a school district. Is there a way we can really, for instance, that stadium that seats, 10,000 people, we can't distance and keep people more than 250 people to include the band. This is almost comical. I feel somehow we have to say, hey, Mr. Wolf, you're being idiotic about a whole lot of things, but on the practical matter, like a basketball game, this is asinine. Is there some way that we can, I don't know, write a letter, say, hey, support this idiocy?
Well, Tom, we have to respect what is there as it's there, and we've adjusted, and certainly there's a lot of frustration, but we've done well to keep pace with it so far. So I'm sure Neil will keep your concerns in mind. You're not the only one who feels that way, but we do have to respect whatever the guidelines that are in place are currently.
And I just want to make sure, I'm curious, when you read through all this, it's required every time a football player takes his mouth guard out, it has to be sanitized. Obviously, that is never going to happen, and there's no way that can be enforced. So that's what I'm wondering, to what extent are we going to be micromanaging every tiny little activity within any athletic event?
So those are the things that we've been working through with our coaches and the athletic department. And so again, just as you wash your hands with soap and water, we can make sure that we have some soap and water on the sideline so that we can wash those mouthpieces before they go back in if they do fall on the ground, or every time you take it out, you make sure you do it. So there's a lot of processes and procedures that we need to make sure that our coaching staff understand what is expected of themselves as well as their student athletes.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Anything else on this health and safety plan presentation tonight? Okay, next up is non-public transportation. We heard from those citizens expressing their concerns and problems with it. Could Neil or the solicitor remind us, especially us older people, frame where we are with it, like what has been done? Were they reacting to a statement that was officially made to them, or have we announced that we're probably going to make a change? Exactly where are we? Please just reframe the status we're at now with this.
So Tim, do you want me to start on that and then you talk about the policy?
Well, how about, I think it would make sense if I explain what our legal obligation is, and then you can explain where we are practically as a result of that.
Okay.
About 2 weeks ago, the Pennsylvania School Boards Association came out with a memo pointing out something that nobody's really considered because it hasn't been an option. And that is that school districts are only obligated to provide transportation to non-public school students if the school district is providing similar transportation to their own students. Specifically, Section 1361 of the school code says just that. It says if you are providing transportation to the public school students, you have to provide the same level of, you have to provide identical transportation to non-public school students. Now that analysis is on a grade by grade basis. So if you provide elementary school, as the Erie School District defines it, elementary school level transportation, then you have to provide elementary level transportation to the non-public school students, irrespective of whether the non-public schools are using the K through 12 model
but we're using an elementary and middle model. So we're providing K-4 transportation then for our students, and that's all we have to provide to the non-public schools. However, the section of the statute also states that the Board of School Directors, and this is why this is coming to you today, it says the Board of School Directors may provide discretionary transportation to non-public school students within the district. You're only obligated to do it at such point that you're providing transportation for your students. So now that we're in a situation where we're not providing transportation to our students because the board has opted to go to largely a online model, there is a discretionary policy that the board can make that you either will or will not provide transportation to the non-publics during that period of time that no transportation is being provided to the public school students. Have I sufficiently confused everyone?
I think you helped me.
Okay. So with that said, that's the obligation on the law. It's a discretionary option for you. I will note that while we are providing for CTE students to go to school and special education students to go to school, of course, there's no cases on these pandemics and when public school districts go fully online. So we have to look into the laws that exist to the extent, or the case law that exists to the extent that we can apply it toward the pandemic. And it's our opinion that just because we're providing transportation to CTE students and special ed students doesn't mean we're obligated to provide that same level of transportation to the non-pubs. However, under federal law, there are some special ed students that we're obligated to provide to the non-public school students. So we would provide that transportation under those federal laws, but it doesn't trigger transportation en masse for all of the non-public school students. So with that, that's the end of the law. Unless you have any other questions, I'll turn it over to Mr. Brockman.
Mr. Brockman?
So we're having this conversation with you guys today, and so we found, as Tim said, we found out about this roughly 2 weeks ago. So in that 2 week span between then and now, we did reach out to all of the non-pubs and private schools around that we are providing transportation with, and just made them aware that, hey, this is the representation, and this is the words that we got. This is the terms that we got from the PSBA, and we did not want it to be something where they are how many weeks in and we're pulling the plug and it came out from nowhere. So we at least wanted to be upfront with each of them and just let them know that this is out there, and if the board so chooses to make this policy decision, it's going to happen. So we didn't want to kind of leave them high and dry. We at least wanted them to have some forewarning.
Those that have begun class already, they are being transported as of now.
Yes, that is correct.
If they're aware, then they've been made aware that it's possible that sooner than November or in November that could end.
That is correct. So, Mr. President, they've been made aware that this could end in the next week or so. If the school board makes the determination next week to not provide transportation, they've been made aware that they will need to come up with alternative arrangements starting the week afterwards. I will also note that this does not include the charter schools. The charter school law has a separate provision which obligates us to provide transportation in any situation.
Regardless of what we do for our own kids.
Regardless of what we do for our own kids. So we're only talking about those non-public, non-profit schools, which are traditionally seen as the parochial or diocesan schools in Erie, and then a few other of the independent non-public schools, the Christian Leadership Academy, Country Day School, and the Lutheran Memorial from the individuals who spoke today, and others.
Okay, I just wanted to frame it for the board members so they know what we're facing or where we are with it. And now, if any board members have any questions or comments, now's the time.
I do.
Go ahead, Rose.
Okay, Neil, how many students are we talking about in the private and parochial schools that we are busing right now?
So currently we have about 260 on EMTA that we are busing. Altogether, it is 391 when you include the students who are on Yellow Bus. Okay. And that is based on last year's counts as well as this year's counts. So just trying to, it all together.
So you're telling me that right now we're busing 260 on EMTA, Catholic school kids, private
Correct.
school kids. Okay, so they're getting out and taking the buses themselves.
Yes.
How many are using our yellow buses?
It would be, based on last year's numbers, I believe it was 140. And then I know Mr. Pashnicki is on. He can give me a more exact account. I believe we're still at that number.
Is that the number we're at, Randy? 140?
Yes, roughly. The numbers are continuing to change every day, but at last count, that's about where we were, 135, 140.
And we're busing the charter school students because they're not doing virtual, are they? The majority of them?
Perseus House is utilizing EMTA. They have historically. Montessori is, we're still working with how they're going to get their kids to school. They were working on finding their own independent yellow bus contract and then go through the reimbursement process, which is what we did with them last year. RB Wiley has a yellow bus contract already. And then we will work through the reimbursement process with them as well. And we're currently talking with Erie Rise as to how they would like to work their transportation. They contacted us several times within, I think, just the last 2 weeks, just trying to figure out how they want to do it. Now, last year they did bus their own students. They had their own independent yellow bus contract, and we did the reimbursement process with them.
Okay, so we're busing roughly 140, 135 students on the yellow buses.
Correct.
At the same time, we're doing the charter school. Have we started the charter schools yet?
So again, last year, no Erie City bus, a yellow bus, transported any of the charter students. Currently, right now, there is no plans to do that unless Erie Rise. Again, we've been talking back and forth with how they would like their transportation to go. And they have yet to give us names of students or any of the real information that we could use to develop routes for them. They're still kind of weighing their options as to whether or not they would like us to transport them or they would enter into a yellow bus agreement with somebody else.
Okay.
Darlene, can you raise your hand?
Darlene?
Yes, thank you. So Neil, of the 260 students that are riding the EMTA buses, would those students still be able to ride EMTA if they paid for it?
That is correct.
Okay. And students so the one family that they chose to send their child to Lutheran Memorial, what if that family had chosen to go to another public school district and pay the tuition? Would that school district then have to provide them with transportation, or would we have to provide the transportation?
I don't believe that we would have to provide it. There is a provision in school code that deals with student living outside of 10 miles, and anything above 10 miles, the district of residency, as opposed to the district they're attending, we are not obligated legally to provide the transportation.
Okay. And then finally, Randy, lots of times I'll see our yellow buses that are going to the non-pubs, and it's not efficient. They only have, a few students on the buses. Is there any way that we can revamp our routes to, if the board chose to continue to provide transportation, that we could save some revenue?
Yes, absolutely. We are limited by the 24 passengers on a bus, which is making some of them look a little less efficient. But we will, as things settle down over the first week or two, we're looking at trying to combine some of those routes again.
Okay, thank you.
I just asked the solicitor how we might respond to the question of this, and I think he said this earlier to all of us, that we can allow this to continue until such time as we decide we don't want it to continue. we can, the only reason to have a resolution is to bring it to an end officially. So unless, if a majority of the board wants to do that, we can put a resolution on the agenda for next week. I'm not advocating in any direction. I think we're all sympathetic to the concerns that were expressed, and we're all aware of the costs that we always have to weigh. So anyway, I'm just putting it out there for your information that the solicitor's advice is this is in place. It will continue until such time as we officially declare it won't. And so having heard that, anybody want to express themselves on it?
Tyler raised his hand.
Tyler?
Thank you. I do want to just, I guess, echo what you just said, Mr. President, about I do empathize with the plight that these parents are in, and primarily the students, given everything that we have faced, and also that this is a state funding issue. And so what we are asking here is for our students and our teachers who are experiencing, and our district who is experiencing enormous financial crisis, to the point of where we're asking whether or not to like update some ventilation systems at this time. We're weighing costs of that. And so I think what we're doing here is it's unfortunate the state has pitted a vulnerable student against vulnerable student. That's not fair. And I agree with what they are saying. However, equality is not equity. And I think if we continue to provide busing, what we're asking and telling our students and the parents and the families here, as well as the teachers and the other staff that we've had to put up for furlough, that I think that's insulting to them. I do. My heart is with those. My son was at LMA 2 years ago, and I get it. We have to make choices as parents, but at the same time, I don't feel that our students and our teachers and our staff should have to bear that burden, and that's my stance on it.
Anyone else?
Mr. President?
Mr. Spiegel?
I guess just my opinion. I guess I haven't thought a great deal, except that we're already putting our Erie community, in my opinion, behind the power curve by not having classes. These parochial school parents have been paying taxes this whole time, and they need to get something for their tax dollars. They're not getting the education, which is in some accounts they do that on their own choice. But a lot of others are doing it out of necessity now, since they don't have classes for their students. I think the least we can do is provide them education, particularly as I recall the furloughs, we're not laying off any of our bus drivers. So we have to have something for them to do. Am I wrong? I mean, they can only Facebook so much time during the day. I really do think that we should continue doing what we're doing, provide the parochial school students with the transportation.
I know earlier Sumner asked a question by email that we all saw the question and answer to, and Neil's answer, the cost of this, and Neil's answer was the amount budgeted for the school year. But is there a cost figure that can be applied weekly, or do we know more specifically the weekly cost, the monthly cost, the quarterly cost?
Mr. President,
Mr. Walker?
the number that Mr. Brockman put out was the number for the charter school transportation.
Oh, that's right.
But I do believe that he has worked out a weekly number for non-public transportation.
Well, Neil, just reasonably, if you have a reasonable ballpark figure, just what it is we're weighing on the one side of the scale, just if you could give us an idea.
So it was roughly, I think I said $20,000 a month for the bus passes, transportation through EMTA. And then when you dial back the cost for the transportation of our bus drivers, it worked out to being, hold on a second, because I have it in a spreadsheet and I have to find it now. we're currently using 7 of our bus drivers to transport the yellow buses. Salary alone on a monthly basis is about $38,000. And benefits, I'm sorry, salary and benefits, it's about $38,000.
Mr. President,
Rose?
okay, but those people are working. They're still on our payroll. So we could utilize them to transport the children and then come back and do their work that they have to do in the buildings or whatever. So they're going to get paid regardless. Correct?
I was just giving the monthly cost for transportation for the non-public students. So just saying that.
Okay.
Neil, does that include the fact that we're limited on how many people we can put on the bus?
As Mr. Persnicki said earlier, the 24 kids per bus is hampering that a little bit. We do, as the conversation was before, we do have a number of routes to some of our non-pubs, which are roughly 10 to 15 students for one building, and then we've got 10 to 15 for another building, and it doesn't make sense. We can't put them all on the same bus because it's over the 24, and so we do have to keep the student count lower because of that.
And that number you gave us reflects that?
Yes, that reflects it because of the 7 routes that we're using.
But when you say 38,000, that would be their full salary for the month?
And benefits.
And as Rose was saying, they would still be able to spend some time at our schools, right? I mean, they have the morning run and the afternoon run.
Yes, our full-time employees would come back and we would be able to put them on labor duty.
Lori?
Oh, hi. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I agree with Tom on this. I agree to just continue to provide the students with transportation, to receive their education. And if we can do that and we're still we're not in any financial bondage by doing that, then, I would suggest, that's just my stance on that, is to continue to provide that for the families, even though they are working and whatnot. Honestly, I just don't feel like it's going to kill us to, continue to help the students to have the accessibility to get to their educational institution.
Walter?
Just wanted to say, I believe that the cost savings by not providing the transportation, when you back out the yellow bus driver salary, as those costs will be retained by the school district, would be the approximate $20,000 a month in EMTA bus passes that the Erie School District would not otherwise have to purchase, and fuel and maintenance costs associated with the Erie School District yellow buses. So if we're looking at 7 yellow buses, I don't know what the fuel and maintenance costs are. Neil, would it be appropriate to estimate a $5,000 a month figure for fuel and maintenance?
Yes.
Nodding his head correctly. So it appears, and we're not making a recommendation one way or the other, this is just to give you the information so you can make your decision, that the cost savings to the Erie School District by not providing transportation to the non-publics should be around $25,000 a month. That would continue between now and November. So you'd be looking at, about a month and a half by the time this policy, if it was to be stopped, would be a couple weeks into September. So you'd be looking at about a month and a half in. So, that would be that savings. And then after November, the school district would be obligated to pick up the elementary transportation so that the savings on the middle would only be in relation to the middle and high school students. So it would be less than that $25,000 a month. Is that correct, Neil? And he's nodding his head
correct.
Again. So it appears that if I do the quick back of the envelope math, it's about $150,000 to $200,000 annual savings. Is that correct?
Correct. And just to clarify, the monthly cost for fuel and maintenance is
for the 7 buses would be about $11,000.
Okay, so it's more than I thought. So it's double what I thought. So then we'd probably be looking at probably about two and a quarter, 230. Is that, Brian? You think that's appropriate?
Yes.
Okay, two and a quarter, 230 would be the savings.
Mr. President,
Arlene?
I feel for these parents, and I do also feel for these students because they started the school year already, and they're getting used to their new academic setting. But I want to go back to the point I made that 260, which is 2/3 of these students, can still ride EMTA and pay for it. And our students and families are suffering greatly because of a lack of funding throughout the years, and the inequities that we see in public education. So I'm not going to repeat what Tyler said, but I kind of agree, or not kind of, I do agree with what he's saying, that we need to look at our own district and the needs of our district right now. As a taxpayer, I've always paid taxes because I feel that as a citizen, it's my responsibility to contribute to the education of our community. The more educated our community is, the more healthy it is. Our children all went to private schools, Catholic schools, because we are Catholic. I never ever felt like I was losing out on something because I was paying taxes and not getting something for it. I am getting something for paying my taxes, and that is an educated community. So I am leaning more towards what Tyler is saying, is that 2/3 of these students can still get transportation. They just have to pay for it. I am concerned for the other third, obviously, but I also we have to look at our district and our financial needs. So I would be supporting this if it came up as a resolution.
Mr. President?
When?
I just like 2 things. What is the cost for the EMTA that we're renting for the EMTA to utilize? And one thing I do have to say, if they do catch the EMTA buses, we have to look at the fact that we're chartering the buses from EMTA, so they have a specific route. If they was to catch the EMTA as a regular bus route, the bus route may not go directly to their school or to their houses or their corners, whatever they catch it.
Mr. Walker?
We need to look at that as well.
So I can answer
Go ahead, Neil.
both of those questions. Right now, we're still negotiating with EMTA what the rate is going to be. We're anticipating that it's going to be roughly $3.10 per pupil per day. That is the historical trend that we've gone on for the last couple of years. So that's what we actually built our budget on. And then as for the other question about the routes, and Randy can chime in if I'm getting this incorrect, but for the high schoolers, there is no what they call a trip or run for the parochial schools. So the students who are attending Prep and Mercier's Prep and Villa Maria, they're already taking a regular fixed route that is out there. There is no special trip or runs for those buildings, much like unlike what we had last year for many of our buildings. We had those individual trip or runs that would basically go around the neighborhoods and then end at a school. The parochial schools, that is not something that they have done.
Gwen, did you have any more? Or did that answer your question?
And the only reason I say that is my father was a retired bus driver. So I know that when you catch a bus for a parochial school, it doesn't go directly to, you may have to walk a block or two to that school if the bus doesn't stop in front of that school. And they may have to walk a couple blocks to catch the bus. So that's just what I'm thinking of. But when you're saying they can catch the EMTA, they can pay for it. Right now, they're being comforted because they catch the bus at one particular corner and that bus takes them straight to their school. That was my little spiel, what I wanted to say. You know, I'm listening to you say, well, they can pay for it. But then we have to look at the fact that that bus doesn't directly go to their school. They may have to transfer. Just food for thought.
Anyone else? I just, my own personal reaction, hearing those mothers talk about how they had been our students, but had to make the decision to leave us during this time we're in flux because they have to work, both parents. I find myself very sympathetic to that. I guess I wouldn't have been aware of it if I hadn't heard it tonight. It just hit you in real terms, but again, I don't want us to be indecisive. I feel like it's my responsibility for us to give them an official answer, but we don't necessarily have to settle it tonight. But if we intend to bring it to an end, we should say so and let them know. And that would mean that a majority of us would want to approve a resolution to do that, because otherwise the service continues as it is. So that's our situation. If 5 of us want to approve a resolution, there'll be a resolution that we can act on. I'm not counting strictly yet at this point, but I think I didn't hear more than 2 people take that position, and I'm not sure they strongly took that. So in other words, I don't want this to drift endlessly, but if we don't want to intervene quickly and bring it to an end, we don't necessarily have to do it right away either. I guess I'm sympathetic to the fact that the community is in flux and there's so much uncertainty out there that if we can provide some stability in the short term, I feel most comfortable with that. That's my answer. If my responses are big, I apologize, but I'm just trying to process this myself as an individual board member.
Mr. President, I have a question.
Go ahead, Rose.
And maybe the attorney wants to answer it for me. Could we just bus the little ones, the elementary school ones, in the private schools or the parochial schools, and then the EMTA students, the high school students, could they pay theirs on their own? So we have it split, because some of those parents have little kids. Somebody.
I'm processing at this moment. The law says that we may, the board of school directors may, out of the funds for the district, provide for the free transportation of any resident pupil to and from the kindergarten, elementary, or secondary school in which they are lawfully enrolled. And then there's other language, but that's the operative language at this point.
So we could.
So the cases that we've looked at in the past, of course, there's nothing specifically on point because we've never been here, but the cases we've looked at in the past have said it's essentially a grade level analysis. And so if we made the determination to do K through whatever you determine elementary to be, then I would say that would pass muster.
Okay, thank you.
How would the board feel about letting this continue to some date that we would agree on, at which time we would promise to revisit it? Maybe the first date that comes to mind would be November, but if somebody would want to suggest a sooner date, we could do that. But just so that we give an answer, again, we don't have to unless a majority of us want to. And I'm not trying to pressure anyone into changing what they think. I'm just trying to bring this into focus so we can give these people who are concerned an answer and put it to rest, at least the best we can for the time being.
Mr. President.
Mr. Spiegel.
I recommend the first of the year. Continue it to the first of the year, then we will revisit it at that time.
Well, I think this is the kind of thing we just ask for a head nod, and or if I suggest November. If you think January is better, let's. How does the rest of the board feel about revisiting, allowing it to continue as is, and revisiting it in January? How does the rest of the board feel?
I believe, Mr. President, Mr. Spiegel, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe your indication was to consider it before January to be effective in January. Is that true?
I'm sorry, I misunderstood what you just said.
I understood your comment to mean that let's let's revisit it possibly in December to be effective in January. So whatever decision the board would make, you would continue it through the end of December, but you would make a decision in December as to whether you would stop at January 1st. Was that the
Correct.
intent of the comment?
Correct. Point being, once we get to January, we're already into the next term, and it would create more problems to not know.
Correct. So that we have some definitive answer for the latter half of the year.
Correct. How comfortable is the rest of the board with that?
I think that's kind of unfair because if we decide then not to bus those students, they've already put a half a year in at a school. They've made friendships. They know their teachers. I don't think that, I mean, if we're not going to do it now, I guess I don't think we should do it. That would be my opinion as an educator.
Well, that's a valid point, Darlene. I mentioned November because I thought then we'd see where we were with our own situation. That was my reason for suggesting that, but I'm not opposed to what Tom's suggesting. But again, this is one of those cases where none of us are going to be wrong. It's just the preference of how what we see individually is more, persuades us more conscience-wise. It's a tough one. So I just to get us to zero in as best we can is, could we hear from the rest of you?
This is Tyler. I would be inclined to agree with what Rose had just said out loud, that we focus in on providing the yellow bus services to the younger students. And I think that would be cost effective to a degree while also creating some stability for those especially those younger students who would have more difficulty utilizing the EMTA.
And I also agree with Rose's recommendation, John, as well.
Well, there's 3 board members who have the same opinion. I'm not sure that I fully understand it because I was processing my own stuff, but whatever a majority of us want to do, we'll do it.
Mr. President, may I ask a question of Ms. Sheridan?
Rose, the solicitor has a question for you.
Yes, go ahead.
Just because everyone defines elementary differently, are you K through 8, K through 4, K through 5?
Well, I don't, our private schools operate K to 8. Don't the parochials K to 8?
Many of them operate K to 8. There are a few that operate K to 12. But I just want to make sure that all the board agrees with what your intention was for elementary.
Okay, well then I would have to say K to 8 because if you have a brother and sister and one's in 5th grade and the other's in 7th, you have to transport them both. But I would say K to 8.
So I just want to, as Mr. President,
No, it's a good point.
As you're asking the board for an interpretation or a consensus, I wanted to make sure they were on the same page. So the concept that's before us now is whether to continue transportation for K to 8 only.
Thank you for stepping in with that clarification, Mr. Wachter. Well, we have 3 board members who support that course of action. If we have 2 more, that's what we'll do. I'm not ready to agree to it, but that doesn't mean that anyone, we can't have everyone else feel that way. So anyone else share that view or want to join that?
I just have one question, Mr. President.
Go ahead.
Will this be also for the charter schools? Because I keep hearing us saying private and parochial. Will this be for charter schools too?
No, they're a separate consideration, Gwen. We have to provide them transportation in any case.
All right,
you don't
thank
have a
you.
choice. You don't have a choice with them.
All right.
Just for the others.
All right, I'll go with it on a limited basis.
Okay, that's 4.
This is Lori. I'd be okay with the K to 8.
Okay, that's 5. Okay, so the solicitor will prepare a resolution for Wednesday's meeting that will reflect what the 5 of you just preferred. And that gives us all a couple more days to think of some more questions and concerns and mull it over.
I would just ask, Mr. President, if Mr. Polito, Mr. Brockman, or Mr. Brzezinski had anything to add prior to the end of this conversation.
I think the K-8 is probably a good cutoff. I was just taking a look at some of the enrollments in those schools, and the majority of them do run through 8th grade. So that makes the most sense to me. I don't know what, as far as Randy and Neil, what they feel.
My only concern is we do have 1 or 2 that are K through 12, and we will have siblings, or we do have siblings that are in the, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, and then also siblings, a brother or sister that are in that 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade area too. So it's just something to consider.
Well, we have until Wednesday to wrestle with that, but there'll be a resolution, and of course, next Wednesday night, when that resolution is under consideration, we can discuss this, and if anyone has a suggestion to modify or amend it, or I'm just saying, we're moving in that direction, and next Wednesday, we can still discuss it before we make it final. Is everyone okay with that?
I just have a question, Mr. President.
Go ahead, Sumner.
To get an idea of what this would save, how many kids are there in K through 8 as opposed to high school?
How does it shrink? How does that shrink from the total number we were given down to just the elementary minus the senior high? Anybody have an answer tonight, or do you want to just?
Mr. Schnecky seems to.
Randy, do you have that tonight, or do you want to get it to us?
I don't have it exact, and we can work on that, but roughly speaking, your 200 number, your EMTA number that Neil had said earlier, I think it was about 230. That would be the high school age students.
260 is what
260. I'm sorry.
So I just did it quickly. I'm sorry, Attorney Walker. The bulk of the EMTA kids were from Cathedral Prep, Mercier's Prep, Mother Teresa, and Villa Maria. So when you take out and these are last year's numbers, when you take out the Mother Teresa kids, it's about 230.
And how many elementary are there?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Sumner.
165 roughly. That would be the ones the 140 that are on the yellow bus, and then those students who are attending Mother Teresa who are riding the EMTA.
So there's fewer in the elementary than in the high school, even though it's twice as many years.
Yes.
So it would be a significant savings.
Yes.
Well, we now have a resolution to deal with next Wednesday to react to this, to resolve it. So, and we have the time in between now and then to think of any other questions or concerns and to give it some more thought. So we've moved it in a direction that should satisfy everyone. Everyone will at least know what the future holds as far as we can answer it for them. So it'll move along to next Wednesday, and Wednesday we can continue to discuss it before we vote on it.
Mr. President?
Mr. Spiegel?
If we could just ask Randy if he could actually pull out and extrapolate those numbers of what the actual savings would be if we did the K through 8, how much would we be saving by not adding the 9 through 12 as well? I'd like to see that breakout, please.
Yes, we can do that.
Thank you, Randy.
All right, well, the next item we have is the PDE Targeted Support and Improvement Plan. Assistant Superintendent Teresa Zumagawa.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm just going to share my screen here. Give me 1 second. So on the agenda for approval next week are 6 targeted support and improvement plans. And I'd like to give the board a very short explanation of why those plans are on the agenda. And what I want to make you aware of is consistent with the Every Student Succeeds Act. Pennsylvania developed a school improvement planning process. So there's 3 levels to that process. So there's comprehensive support and improvement, there's additional targeted support and improvement, and there's targeted support and improvement. And what we have some students or with some schools in is the targeted support and improvement. And what that is a locally managed cycle of school improvement. It functions as an early warning system for at-risk student groups, so subgroups in some of our schools. We do have 6 schools that have identified at-risk student groups under targeted support and improvement. It's Erie, Strong Vincent, East, Edison, Perry, and PV. These plans do need to be approved by the board, but they do not need to be submitted to the Pennsylvania Department of Education.
Any questions,
What
concerns?
does this mean for our school community? That the schools are required to develop building level improvement plans. And what they do is analyze school community strengths and challenges and set conditions for improved student outcomes, both academic and non-academic. And what I mean by that, these are the indicators that the state uses to identify schools that do need the support and achievement, academic progress, which is growth, graduation rate, English learner proficiency, and then additional indicators selected by Pennsylvania are regular attendance and career standards benchmark. What is required of schools designated for TSI. I'm not going to read all of these bullets, but as you're reading them, I'm going to focus on the last one to inform the board that this work is already in motion through the district strategic planning process. The plans that were written by the schools already include things that we are working through in our strategic planning process and our data summits. What resources and supports will be available to schools designated for TSI? So we do work closely with the IU. Karen Ryan, our Director of Teaching and Learning, former principal of Piper Burley, Andrea Gloystein, principal of Strong Vincent, and she is also our support administrator for Title I school plans, went through the training in December and January of the past school year. So I'm going to have them just talk briefly about that process and the support we get from the IU.
Sure. So what you'll see on this slide is Pennsylvania Department of Ed's vision and goals for schools and districts in the continuous improvement process. And you can see the first goal really is that the LEAs are accountable and empowered to serve schools identified for support and improvement. And then next, that goes down to schools and communities are accountable and empowered to provide effective, engaging instruction. And then lastly, it goes down to the student level. So students are engaged and healthy, safe students who become career and college ready. And so on the next slide, what you'll see, it should look very familiar to us all because it's really how we move through our strategic planning process and how we've been moving through our cycles of improvement through our data summit. So we see that cycle of improvement again, where schools are setting direction. They assess needs of their students, particularly our subgroups that were having some struggles when this designation occurred. They create a plan to address the needs. They implement the plan, monitor and make sure that we're making the progress that we want to be making, and then adjust the course as need be. And that cycle just continues and continues. This is something that our school buildings, our instructional leadership teams in our schools have been working on. And they've worked really, really hard to, again, go back in and check out their data and create plans to address these particular student groups. Andrea is going to really talk through what was the process that schools went through to complete this Title I planning process.
Hello, everyone. I was asked to briefly share Strong Vincent's experience in creating our TSI plan. As you know, Strong Vincent fell into this designation due to our performance of our English language learners subgroup, specifically on their WIDA assessment. Initially, we developed a small core team at Strong Vincent. We went to the IU to begin our first steps. We worked alongside teams from the city of Erie, as well as the neighboring county schools. We spent time creating our vision, which actually aligned perfectly with our strategic plan. Additionally, we created a steering committee, including community members, representatives from our community schools team, including Gannon and Highmark, teachers and parents. Next, we traveled back to the IU and were able to dig deeper into our school level data using the PA Future Ready Index. We looked at all of our subgroups, not just our EL students, and we analyzed our building strengths as well as our challenges. Most importantly, we determined our priorities for improvement as we planned moving forward. The last step of the process focused on goal setting and some action planning. We worked closely with our building level ILT, as Karen said, to craft a plan that made sense to us and allowed us to prioritize our challenges and how we can engage the supports available to us. During our shutdown last spring, we have been able to meet virtually with the IU staff, and they continue to be a great support for us, and principals from the other TSI schools to continue our important discussions. At this time, I will turn it back over to Teresa. Thank you.
Thank you both. I do have the principals of the 6 schools on the meeting if there are any specific questions about the plans. We will continue to adjust these as things change with our school situation, the pandemic. But if there are any questions from the board.
Are there?
More a suggestion than a question, Teresa. So since Andrea said that they were identified because of the EL population at SV, is there a way for us, or perhaps I wouldn't be at all surprised if you guys are already doing this, for us to look at the elementary schools that they went to and see if there might be some need for strengthening of instruction at the elementary level?
Absolutely.
Any other comments or questions from the board? Thank you, Teresa, for your organization of this and the people you brought to the meeting tonight. And I apologize for interrupting you earlier.
That's okay. Thank you.
Investments is next with Mr. John Kuhn, our controller. John.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. I know you've all had to process a lot of very detailed information tonight, so I'll try to be brief. But I'm here to talk about the investments of the district. And when I do, I'm mainly talking about our capital projects fund, which is the fund that's paying for all the improvements we're doing to our school buildings currently. And that fund is made up of 2 pools of money, which one being the bonds that we issued last year, and the other being the contributions from the general fund that the fund has made over the past 2 or 3 years. All in all, that's about $70 million in total currently, and it's about 50-50 between the 2 pools of money. And that is mainly invested in money markets and treasury bills through PNC Investments. Now, over the next few months, the last of the good treasury bills that we purchased before everything kind of went south are going to mature. That's going to happen between now and January. And when we met with our advisor from PNC, his comments were that when they do mature, there's not a whole lot of good options to roll them into. There's not better treasury bills to go out there and buy. Their money markets that they offer are not paying an awful lot of interest right now. So we talked about our options, and one of which was changing kind of our investment structure and looking at doing more with municipal bonds instead of treasury bills. And when he did that, it would work out better than doing things with treasuries. However, when you net things against the fees that it takes to hold these accounts, it's still not netting an awful lot of interest. And he mentioned to us while we were going through these conversations that it's hard for them, if not impossible, to beat the rates that were offered to us by First National Bank back when we did our RFP. That his suggestion would be that if First National would offer us the same rates for this capital project fund money that they offered for our general fund money, that would be the best rate at the time to put these funds into. So we reached out to First National, and they said that they would offer us new accounts with those same rates that they offered for the general fund. And that would be a suggestion here for a short-term solution for this, as the next at least 6 to 12 months of investment opportunities don't look great. So this would be almost a twofold suggestion. The first would be that, one, we move that fund over to First National Bank to obtain these rates. The other suggestion that was made by PNC was that if First National would offer us those rates, it would behoove us to sell our treasury bills before maturity and move those all over immediately to start getting those rates. Because our treasuries are pretty valuable. Like I said, they're kind of the last of the good ones that were out there, and they could sell easily. And we wouldn't be penalized, or we'd recoup almost the same money that we would if we waited till maturity to do so. And so we wanted to run that past you guys, the board, and make sure that you were comfortable with those movements.
And John, if I can jump in here too, we did review this whole proposal with PFM. They suggested that we take a look at the collateral that FNB had behind that is required under Act 72 of the school code. We did that. We shared that information with PFM, and they were comfortable with all of that. So again, we wanted to double check and make sure that this move made sense to them as well as us.
What is the rate they're paying?
The rate that First National is paying? They had guaranteed back with the proposal that, according with the month that we're in now, from September till the end of the year, we'd be getting 0.65 basis points on the general fund.
Anyone else? Any questions from the board for John?
Makes sense to me.
Okay. No board members have a problem with that. We'll allow the administration to proceed with that.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Walker?
It's my understanding that'll be an additional item on supplemental. Is that correct? Mr. Polito's nodding his head yes. So that would be an additional authorization on supplemental for next week.
Thank you. Next, we have appointment of voting delegates for the Pennsylvania School Boards Association Delegate Assembly and the election of PSBA officers. It's two different things. And some of you board members who are more familiar know that every year we send voting delegates to that delegate assembly. And in 2018, we sent 3. That was Mrs. Feeney, Ms. McNair, and Tyler Titus. Last year, we only had 2, and that was Angela McNair and Tyler Titus. Our board secretary advised me that we're authorized to authorize 3 names. So what we would need is to have up to 3 volunteers, and then we put that in a resolution for us to approve and make it official at Wednesday's meeting. So if everybody who knows what I mean understands it, do we have 3? And hopefully we don't have 4, so we don't have to do leg wrestling to settle it.
Mr. President, I'll be interested.
Gwen?
Yes.
I would also like to be considered.
Gwen and Tyler, I'd like to give Lori a shot at it. She's interested for a reason I'll get to after this, but I'm not pressuring anybody.
I would hold
would
it.
be
If
interested.
Lori wanted to go, I would step out of her way.
Lori, are you?
Yeah, I would be interested.
Well, there's still room for Gwen, Lori, and Tyler to do it. So that can work. I'll explain my reason for mentioning Lori in a second, but if that's okay with everyone, that'll be the resolution for us to approve that would authorize Gwen, Lori, and Tyler to be our voting delegates to the PSBA Delegate Assembly. That'll be on the agenda for next Wednesday. Then the next part of this is why I mentioned Lori. Lori had hoped to become a Pennsylvania School Boards Association officer. And I had mentioned it early on, and we talked about trying to promote her and help her do that. But then when the virus problem, the pandemic changed everything and distracted us from so many things, we didn't do much. We didn't succeed in much. And for whatever reason, the PSBA didn't include her among potential candidates for the offices, which we now have to vote. So that's my reason for having a little bit of extra sympathy for Lori's desire to serve and not really getting to first base with it this year. I hope she wouldn't lose heart, but she can at least represent us as a voting delegate at the assembly. So having said that, the board secretary, Mrs. Jones, has given me a document, which I assume would be available, if it hasn't been already, to all of you, where we'll have to vote to approve candidates, which were a slate of candidates for the PSBA offices, which we were given. And I think Angela Jones told me there's only one where there's a choice. The rest of them are all just a single approval of a name. So I think that's on page 4 of 5. Anyway, could everyone take a look at this and be ready on Wednesday when we have our committee of the whole to bring this more into focus and decide who we want to cast our votes for those PSBA officers?
Mr. President?
Go ahead, Tom.
Hey, can we write in Lori?
We try.
I'll have to check the ballot form to see if that's an option.
I like that, Tom. We don't know, but Angela's going to take a look. Angela Jones is going to take a look, and the solicitor can help her.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I did look at the ballot. I didn't see a write-in box. I just saw an abstain box. But I might be incorrect.
I don't think you can write in. It didn't, from when I filled out the application, it looks like they choose based off of a lot of information that you complete. So I don't think it's the same as when we're running in like the general campaigns, which is totally fine. There's always other opportunities.
Well, that's very good of you, Lori, but I also like Mr. Spagel's willingness to jump in and step out of the mold and tell those guys. So
she's getting her name out there right now. We make sure of that.
Yeah, we'll try to give her a better, more push for, the old Erie thing. Did they pay attention to Erie anyway? But none of us really could focus on things like this with what happened to our attention being diverted elsewhere where it was. But so we have till Wednesday to decide who those votes will go for. And there's only one really that's in dispute, I think. But Angela, could you just look anyway to see if we could cast 9 votes for an individual not listed? I don't suppose they'd like it, but maybe you could find out.
I will, no question.
All right, thank you. Okay, we have the review of the agenda, then we'll need an executive session. So at this point, is there anything on the agenda that you want to talk about or have a question or an interest in talking about now? Certainly have till next week to inquire, but if that doesn't need to be addressed, let's take at least a 5-minute break, and then we need an executive session. Okay, I've got 8 o'clock. Can we shoot for 8:05 or a minute or two later, maybe? In real time. Okay, we'll ask everyone who's not authorized to be in the executive session to leave us now, and we thank you. And the rest of us will reconvene in executive session in about 6 or 7 minutes.